Welcome to the Strength Culture Podcast.
I hear him chat from the noise, move too quick, can't stop for the talking. I hear him chat with the boys, not so tough, but must keep caution.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Strength Culture Podcast. Today, I have Alec, Blenis on the podcast. This has probably been somewhat of a long time coming. We've been talking about it quite a bit. And then, of course, as you guys know, it's taken me forever to start the podcast back up. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Alec and I have had a lot of exchange, both personally and then also within like the same or similar circle of people for many months now. And we've had some really good conversations, and Alec continues to post incredibly valuable information as well as incredibly hardcore and impressive strength and resistance training on his profile. So welcome, Alec.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jeff. Appreciate the introduction. It's always, coming from a background as an endurance athlete, hearing people say that my feats of strength are impressive is still taking some getting used to, but feels good to have made to that point. So a little bit about me, a little background. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, have been full-time now for the better part of 10 years. That was never my intent. I originally went to school to be a physicist. So I think a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, as a mediocre athlete in school, right? Not great at specializing. I was never the best at any sport. I just kind of had a fun time doing all of them. So I always enjoyed, the athletics, the training, the gym, all that kind of stuff. But I didn't think I'd make a career out of it because, to be honest, I was too motivated by money. When it came time to choose a career path, choose a college major, all that kind of stuff, I'm like, all right, what can make a lot of money? Knew what I was good at. Still, interestingly though, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So I wanted to pick something very general. And I thought physics is great. Just having a general understanding of science that I could potentially apply to a wide variety of areas. So I chose physics as a major, started doing that. As I was diving into like graduate research and that kind of stuff, I realized it was actually boring as hell. I had a good time. I was good at it. But compared to the time I was spending in the gym, compared to the competitive racing I was doing at the time, started even like mentoring and coaching some athletes kind of on the side. I realized that was a heck of a lot more fun. And I started to make a little bit of money doing it, realized there's actually pretty good earning potential there as well. So I kind of made the transition. It was like, I don't want to get stuck behind a desk for the rest of my life. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in a basement dungeon, doing lab stuff. So I dropped out. I quit doing that and just pursued coaching full time. And again, I've been doing that for the last 10 years or so. My initial kind of athletic background was predominantly on the endurance side, cross country, track and field, all that kind of stuff. Although, like I mentioned, I was never terribly good at it. And I think a big reason for that is I was never willing to specialize. I still played other sports. I wrestled. I played football, soccer, tennis, baseball, you name it. I continue to still do all of those things. I never just specialized in the distance running like a lot of people. And I never gave up, just basic strength training. Didn't know what I was doing, right? Like I think a lot of kids at that age, I was reading T Nation articles and doing 21s on the bicep curls and that kind of stuff. But combine that with a pretty extensive background on like the running side of things. And you have kind of the makings of a decent hybrid athlete. So fast forward a couple of years, kind of to my college days, and I got into the sport of obstacle racing kind of by chance, which for those who don't know, obstacle racing, think like your Spartan race, Tough Mudder, all that kind of stuff. You have to be able to run fast, run long distances, but you also have to be able to, have mastery over your own body weight, climb over walls, carry sandbags, all that kind of stuff. And I really found a groove there, kind of putting together all the pieces of my athletic background. I did exceptionally well. I ended up getting a sponsorship deal, ended up racing on the Spartan Race Pro team for a number of years, ended up doing over 100 of those events over a span of a couple of years. And that was kind of what was a good segue or opportunity for me to get into coaching. A lot of people started to request my help and advice and that kind of stuff. Shortly after that, I got hired by Complete Human Performance. You may know of Alex Viada's work. So I got hired by them to be their obstacle course racing coach. At least that was what I was initially brought on for. But there's so much overlap with the sport of obstacle course racing and things like military and special forces, law enforcement, that kind of stuff. So I gradually started coaching a wider variety of athletes. And then, fast forward another 10 years to where I am today. And I just love all forms of concurrent or hybrid training. So anyone that wants to combine strength and endurance sports in any capacity, that's really my jam.
And that's a pretty extensive history. I mean, it is kind of an interesting transition to go from physics to training. I mean, they're not like completely far removed, right? Like I would assume that, well, let's not say that. A lot of highly skilled strength and conditioning coaches have at least some fundamental understanding of basic physics. I wouldn't say that necessarily most coaches, because that would probably be inaccurate, but it's not totally far removed. So it is kind of interesting how you still, stayed within that realm. It's, to have that sort of interest. And ironically enough, you can still make a very good living understanding physics, just understanding it and applying it like in the training more than, maybe like a lab coat, right? Like actual practical application of a little bit of understanding of how physics works and how we use it to manipulate our bodies and create resistance and tension and all these different things. So I find it interesting that, so even though you would consider yourself an endurance athlete, you never really stopped doing anything else. It's like you weren't, I guess, you weren't not strength training, you weren't not doing other things, but that was like just your primary interest, right?
Yeah, so I was definitely an endurance athlete by trade. Like I never did any strength competitions or anything like that, right? I was all about just getting as fast as possible, running marathons, ultra marathons, that kind of stuff. And for a long time, I think I took a pretty misguided approach to strength training, but a misguided approach to strength training is a heck of a lot better than not strength training at all. Yeah. So even though I'd say I did a lot of things wrong, and if I could go back in time and train differently as a high school athlete, college athlete, et cetera, it would look a lot different. Like you said, it's never something I gave up. I remember when I was a freshman in college, one of my go-to workouts was 3x30 back squat, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone. And to be honest, I still don't remember how I stumbled across that protocol. But I remember starting out with like 135, right? I could do 135 for 3x30. And I just took the classic approach of like add 5 pounds a week until you die. And I got up to 225 for 3x30, which for a 140-pound endurance athlete is really not bad.
That's remarkably impressive, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I challenge anyone to go. I don't care I don't care what size you are. I challenge anyone to go throw 2 plates on each side of the bar and go do 3 sets of 30 with it. Good luck.
Yeah. So even doing like a kind of a silly protocol like that, it just shows that like if you put in the work, just like keep progressing, good things are going to happen. My biggest regret with that is that I wasn't eating enough to actually get much hypertrophy out of it. But muscular endurance to this day definitely remains a strong suit. The other day, it was like a couple weeks ago, I threw 225 in the bar as a burnout set. I'm like, I'm just going to keep going until it hurts. And I got through 50 reps, and my my blood pressure was like, I could feel like my heartbeat in my brain. So I'm like, I'm the racket. I think that's good enough today. But yeah, I love the muscular endurance stuff. I have a soft spot for it just because that's kind of how I started out. But I wouldn't recommend most people go about it that way.
You have to have a special kind of crazy to enjoy that. You realize that, right? Like a 20 reps, 120 rep set is like done. Look, even if it's not even done near failure, just once you just get like 10 or 12 and everything just starts burning, it's hell, so you like, but I also come from the perspective of like anyone who goes out and decides to run more than like 5 miles is also crazy as well. So, you know what I mean? Like I have a lot of respect. For endurance athletes because I don't think I like if I'm being totally honest, I think it takes way more grit to be an endurance athlete than it does to throw some weights around the weight room. Like I'll probably catch a lot of flack for that, but I'm being totally honest because I just would never throw myself into that fire. Like, I don't, well, maybe not. Maybe that's not true, but it's just not like, I think at some point I'll probably do like a marathon or something, just to do it and say I did it. But and I say that and then I'll get hooked and whatever.
Oh, absolutely. I think anyone who disagrees with that simply hasn't done both sports enough to have an appreciation for it. Not to say that strength training isn't tough, but
no, and it definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say the toughness, it's like strength sports, it's an endurance sport in the sense that you have to have the consistency. Like you still have to wake up and do the thing every day. You still have to have, lifestyle discipline, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's largely the biggest challenge with either of them. I don't think any individual training session, to be honest with you, even, including 20 rep back squats, I don't think training itself is that hard. It's just getting up and doing it day after day and having that consistency. I think that's what separates people who become great at their sport from people who are just good at it, is they're the masters of consistency. They don't necessarily train any harder or aren't necessarily that tougher, if you know what I mean.
That's true. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I like where this conversation is heading, because I feel like, and this is, Lucas, Range of Strength, shout out to him. This is a conversation we're actually going to sit down and go a little bit more in depth in, because I feel like the internet has become this place where there's so much useless information. And I say useless in the sense that it's not necessarily to reflect that the information is inaccurate in any sense, but I feel like people are just incredibly lost in the weeds at this point. And like when you are someone who's going online and looking for some fitness advice, like it is an incredibly hard area right now to discern any sort of like good information from bad information, or practical information and impractical information, like what's relevant, what's not. Like it's hard for professionals to do it, let alone like the layman who's just like, I'm just trying to get in shape, or I'm just trying to get stronger, or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of touch on your point there, because the habit of training period is like the one thing. It is an endurance race in the sense of, if you actually go look at the top of anyone in this industry, they've been there 10, 12, 15 years. Like most people that are excelling at the highest level, that have the best physiques, that are the strongest, that have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of miles under their belt, if they're runners or whatever, like that really is like the staple sort of habit, is just like, no matter what, some consistency is maintained. Like, and I think that's like such an important lesson for people to understand, because, and like you said, which I 100% agree, is like, it doesn't even mean that you are consistently going 100%, because no one's realistically consistently going 100%. But like, I almost view training period as a game of accumulation. Like at the end of the day, if you're showing up and doing something, you more or less with, I'm sure people could find ways to argue this point, but just to keep it simple, you more or less are netting some positive benefit from showing up in training. Like all things considered, like things are done intelligently. And when I say that, just like you're not literally coming into the gym and like training to the point where you're literally injuring yourself or whatever. But I think that's like, it's like principle number one, right? It almost doesn't matter, especially for beginners, what you do. Just show up and train, do something, right?
Absolutely. And I think a big piece of this conversation too, at least a question I get with the concurrent or hybrid training side of it, is people ask about like, periodization and things like that. And they talk about, I'm doing, I'm more focused on my resistance training right now, kind of cardio's in the back burner, or I'm doing a big push on my endurance training right now, whatever. And I always I hate to see that, because when people ask me, how's your cardiovascular capacity so good? It's like, well, I started doing cardio when I was 13 and I have not stopped. Like I have not missed a week. I have not periodized and said I'm not doing cardio for this 3 months or whatever. Yeah. Like I've just been doing it consistently. Maybe not always 100%. I haven't always been putting in crazy volume or anything like that. But the key point is I haven't taken an approach where I'm like, well, I'm not going to train this year, or, oh, I'm in season, so I'm not going to do, these types of workouts or whatever. You just keep moving forward a little bit day by day. But everyone's looking for the like, okay, what periodization block is going to get me, this capacity in 12 weeks? It's like, let's try 12 years. Just keep going.
I know you can't sell 12 years. I think that's like the hardest part for professionals, is like, I think you can still sell products or whatever around blocks and, but like, it's really to just, if like, I feel like if I can just get people to understand that this just has to become routine. Like
Yeah.
you're like, yeah, you can make somewhat acute change. And again, especially beginners, like acute changes are going to be made no matter what. But that's like people just kind of get stuck at lifetime intermediate because they constantly get stuck in this thing of like, they cycle things very hardcore for a few months and then they drop it off and then they pick it back up and they drop it off. And it's like that nothing is ever really sustained, even at like the minimum amount of levels to just keep it going, right?
Yeah.
It's to us, it seems like a crazy thing to be like periodize. Like I haven't periodized anything in years, and a lot of years, but all my clients and all my trainers, like they want everything periodized because they all think that they're like Russian strength athletes from the 1960s that live in state sponsored, have state sponsored utilities, and they don't see their families and they don't have other jobs and whatever. And it's like, look, if you just show up and accumulate something, it's better than nothing. You know what I mean? And then
what? Yeah, I always ask people like in the context of what they are experts at, right? Because not everyone's an expert at strength training or resistance training, but most people are good at something in their life. So I'm like, okay, well, what do you do for a living? And someone's a lawyer, right? I'm like, okay, well, how long did it take you to get good at that? You didn't do that in a 12-week block of studying. Like you've been doing it for years and years and years. So I think getting people to rethink fitness in the same sort of way, both in terms of training and actually getting good at the thing, but also in terms of like digesting information, right? Like if you, as a fitness professional, you go on Instagram and you look at this shit and you're like, how dumb can people be? Like this stuff just doesn't even make sense, right? And you're like, how do people fall for this? Or like, why do people believe this? But then I look at another topic, right? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I asked my friend about it, who's knowledgeable, and he's like, that's fucking stupid, man. Like, where'd you see that? And I think just taking that approach of like, ask someone who's good at what they do. It's like, ask a doctor, like, where would you look for medical advice on Instagram? And they'd be like, probably not, probably nowhere, maybe just a handful of trusted sources, right? And same thing with fitness. But I think it's important for people to think about that. Think about the thing that you're an expert at. How do you decipher good versus bad information in that context? How do you think about getting better at that thing? And then just try to apply that to fitness, because it's not so different than any of those other things.
Yeah, I like that. I like giving them like this sort of analogical representation of excellence in any, like it, because the habits and the patterns are the same no matter what field you're excelling in, right? So it's like, yeah, obviously if you went up to a lawyer and you're like, hey, so did you like, know everything about being a lawyer, the first semester that you started law school? You know what I mean? It's like, obviously they're going to know, like, no, of course not. You know what I mean? So I like putting it in the perspective that people are going to understand. Like, and if you put it sort of in their ballpark, they're going to go, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like it's no different for fitness, right? You mentioned earlier that, excuse me, we've definitely probably done some dumb stuff. Again, it netted towards something, right? But you mentioned like, let me frame it like this. If you could go back to your high school self, like you mentioned earlier, and you could give them a handful of like solid advice for training, for starting to train, or how to think about training or whatever, I'll let you kind of take it. But what would you tell them? What would you tell someone who is in high school and they're just stepping into the weight room for their first time, or they're just starting to pick up running or whatever it is? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think my mistake, and I think a lot of people's mistake, is they specialize too soon. Whether we're talking about sports in general or their approach to the weight room, everyone wants to train like an advanced athlete, and almost no one actually is. So in my case, I'm like thinking of myself as this endurance athlete. So I'm going to take this like hyper endurance focus to the weight room, do these like crazy sets of 30 century sets. I did like sets of 100 on back squat, for a while when I was in high school, which is like, why would you do that instead of just getting stronger in like, sets of 5, 10, whatever. So my biggest piece of advice would be, don't think of yourself as an advanced athlete, because you're just not. Master the fundamentals, get stronger in the 5 to 10 rep range for the most part. Do some accessory work, focus on hypertrophy, just basic stuff, like treat yourself like you would a general population person coming in that just wants to get fit, rather than treating yourself like this super special high performance athlete that needs all these special things. That'd be my biggest piece of advice, is just focus on the general. You'll have the rest of your life to experiment and specialize and do all these cool things that you might be seeing on Instagram. But when you're in your first couple of years of training, you're going to be much better served by just getting generally good, at the basics. And that doesn't mean like you can't have fun. It doesn't mean you can only squat, bench, dead, right? Like that. It doesn't mean that your training has to be, stupidly simple or boring. But it does mean that you shouldn't get too crazy and like always be trying to find the next greatest sports specific exercise or whatever, versus just getting, generally competent in fundamental movement patterns.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm training with one of my rugby teammates / roommate / friend, kind of all the above. And it's interesting because, people obviously have like these like sort of like, set ideas about like what works in the weight room or what someone needs to be doing as an athlete. Right. And it's like, rugby is very interesting because I think I look at rugby, and while it is a contact sport, so there is a lot of relativity if we look at like football, but like American football, but it's also an aerobic sport because you have to play for 80 minutes. So there is this sort of blend of like the physicality of football with the, aerobic capacity of like a soccer player. It's continuous. The contact is continuous. It's nonstop. And it's like when I kind of have this, it's funny because when I see like rugby specialized training, it's like, you guys are just hybrid athletes, really. Like you need to be big, you need to be strong, and you need to be able to stay on your feet more or less for 80 minutes without falling over and like gasping for air, right? Which is, and obviously there's some positional differences, but like from the most general perspective, right? And it's like, it's not his fault, but he's like, we've been going to the gym, we've done a few sessions now, and it's like, we're just doing sort of a hybrid, probably most people would consider like a power building program, right? We're hitting some barbell lifts, and then we're hitting tons of like bodybuilding accessory work on the machines. And it's like, there's this idea that it's not specific enough. And it's like, what is more specific than being bigger and stronger to any sport? Like, and of course, like just because you're doing sets of 8 or 10 doesn't mean you're going to look like Ronnie Coleman next week. Like none of us are. Right. So it's like, oh, I don't want to get too big, or I don't want to get, and it's like, dude, you just need to get bigger and you need to get stronger. And until you literally, and it's like, I'm sure, did you ever see Pat Davidson's post when he was kind of like, squat 4 or bench 3, squat 4, pull 5, right? And it's like, until you get there really is almost like, from the most simplest perspective, there really is no reason to sort of get lost in the weeds, because like, while I would kind of err on the side of like strength doesn't solve everyone's problems, it does solve a lot of problems. And I find that so many people just get sort of like, they sort of just correlate a lot of weird things. And I kind of see them, and it's like, you're just not that strong. Like it's not to be insulting. Yeah. It's just like, from a general perspective, you're just like, you're bench pressing a plate. You know what I mean? Like it's like, oh man, or you're squatting 2 plates and it's not even to full depth or whatever. So it's just like, there is just, I think, a lot of value. And I don't really care what your sport is, in just getting stronger and putting on some quality muscle tissue, and just being consistent. You know what I mean? And I
think it's such an interesting kind of parallel between kind of these high performance athletes and then just your general population, like everyday people, right? I was just reflecting on this week. I had a woman come in who I think is too smart for her own good, in the sense that she like digs around and learns about anatomy, physiology, or whatever, but then kind of invents problems for herself, right? And she's like, hey, I think I have some
invents problems for themselves. Exactly.
She's like, I think I have some like scapular dysfunction, overactive traps, whatever. Will you take a look at how my shoulder is moving on overhead press? And I'm just kind of like, okay, let's see it, right? And she like grabs some dumbbells and is showing me her overhead press. I'm like, well, problem number one is you're overhead pressing 10 pounds. I honestly don't give a shit. And this is what I told her. Like, I don't give a shit about your scapular dysfunction or how your shoulder blade is moving with a 10-pound dumbbell. Like, let's just get stronger. Let's get you overhead pressing, I don't know, like something over a 45-pound barbell or something before we even consider having that conversation, right?
Yeah.
Just the general idea of building some general strength and proficiency. And I think you can make the same kind of case with high performance athletes. I do think there's kind of this U-shaped curve. I call it the U-shaped curve model of sports specificity with increasing kind of training competency or training proficiency. Whereas I think people who are ranked beginners and advanced athletes often require a very similar approach to training, often for different reasons. And I think sometimes people in the intermediate category can benefit from a slightly more, I hesitate to use the word sport specific,
specialized. Yeah.
More room for kind of specialization in the weight room for that intermediate category. But your ranked beginner, I think, needs to focus on the basics for the obvious reasons. Like they just lack the competency in general. They can't handle the complexity of more specialized training, et cetera. As you advance, as you become more competent, there's a little bit more room to specialize and think about some of those things. But then as you get even more proficient and enter that kind of advanced stage of your career, you have so much proficiency and you do so much sport practice already that strength training now takes the place of just filling gaps and maintaining good, just like general human movement, good fundamental kind of general factors. So for different reasons, I think beginners and advanced athletes should often train very similarly, obviously different loads and different levels of competency, but similar approach. And those intermediates might have a little more room for some of the fun stuff, so to speak.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, I think this is a really, really solid point. And I think that I like quite a few models. Just as soon as you said that off the top of my head, I'm like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of models that actually reflect this. Like, let's just take the most recognizable amongst anyone and you look at CrossFit, right? So if you look at CrossFit and you look at, okay, someone starts CrossFit, they go into just like the chaos that ensues. It's like Metcons and it's just like all kinds of generalization, right? Like no one's really, they're just like, they can't really do any of the stuff. But they start doing all this stuff and they do the week, the little 1 or 2 week like intro to CrossFit and they learn some of the basic stuff. And then it's like, okay, boom, Metcons. And that's probably really good for like a lot of people because one, it's just like a super low barrier to entry. They can start doing stuff immediately. Obviously quality can vary from box to box, but like if we're just erring on the side of like positivity and just like, like there's regressions. A lot of boxes will have ways, hey, you can't do this. Here's a way to regress it. This is like the RX version. This is like the regress version and whatever. And then it's like a really good sort of thing. And people do it for a while. And then what tends to happen if you actually like look at it, I think the big picture is that people sort of start to find their little niche that they're good at within CrossFit, right? Whether it's like more of the endurance-based stuff, or whether it's more of the Olympic lifting, or whether it's more of the powerlifting, or whether it's more of the strongman, or I would say they just want to get better at CrossFit. So what a lot of them do, if you actually look at a lot of like the games competitors, especially like the newer ones sort of coming onto the circuit, they hire a lot of specialists. They hire swim coaches, they hire run coaches, they hire Olympic lifting coaches. So whatever their biggest weaknesses are, they will hire specific coaches to sort of bring up that aspect of like what they're missing, right? And then there's this intermediate period of where like they seek a lot of coaching and guidance and specialization on like the things that they really need to get better at, usually things that they weren't inherently good at. And then once they get sort of to that elite level, you kind of see their training return back to what it was in the beginning. And they're able to just kind of go back to the Metcons and, they have a high level of proficiency and as well as varied level of proficiency across the board. that's obviously why they are a high level games athlete. And then they can kind of just go back to enjoying CrossFit more or less as like the sport itself. Like obviously there's still some differences, but like it's almost like that. You're right. I would agree. I would agree that like the beginner and advanced are probably more in this quote unquote same place in terms of like structure and the just enjoyment of the sport and a little bit of just of the like blessed ignorance, just like not really like they just kind of can go back to it, right? And I think another reflection would be if you think of like West Side Barbell, I think is a very accurate depiction of that thing, right? Like a lot of people try to mimic West Side Barbell and the conjugate method, which I think works very well for beginners. Anyone who's like trying to just get exposure to tons of different new movement patterns and different variations, which is very fun because you don't feel like it's not redundant. But they're still close enough where you're getting like a very similar stimulus. But what a lot of people don't realize is these guys were like the best of the best already within powerlifting, and they needed just that little bit of edge. And it's like Louis Simmons' sort of genius was like, these guys have gotten so masterful and proficient at squatting, benching, and deadlifting that the best thing that's going to benefit them is tons of variation, tons of different, varying stimulus. And it's like, it is kind of like, hey, what are you doing today? And it's just like it's just like a totally different day, more or less. I don't want to downplay the system because there is some structure, but it's just a good representation of like, you're going to get people probably who drive into powerlifting. How do they get there? Well, it's very simple. They started working out at their local rec center. They started working out in high school with their football team or with their buddies. They started squat, benching, deadlifting, doing a little bodybuilding accessory. They realized they were pretty good at it. They got stronger at it. Then they probably really started specializing in only squatting, benching, and deadlifting and getting really proficient at those movements. And then once they get into that sort of intermediate, they're pulling 500, 600, 700 pounds, benching 300 plus, upwards of 400, and squatting, whatever, just if you had to throw some loose numbers out there, they sort of then go to that, like, okay, like I've become incredibly proficient, coordinated at these patterns. What are ways that I can sort of mirror these adaptations or these stimulus, but it just not always be the same thing all the time, right? And if you actually look at like even the greats of powerlifting, like Ed Cohn and stuff, like if he wasn't peaking for a meet, he was doing front squats and all kinds of variations. And even like the Russian powerlifting systems were very conjugate in nature. So it's like, I think you see it everywhere. Like the Chinese weightlifting team, everyone loves the Chinese weightlifting team right now. And then their training is very conjugate in nature as well. So it's like the Russians were also very conjugate in nature. Like they're very much known for just kind of like maxing out on all these different random variations all the time. And it's like, because once you get good enough at snatch and in the clean and jerk, it's like you can kind of just go back to experimenting and seeing what works for you. And it's like, if you look at guys like Klokov or whatever, they just kind of came up with lifts that they felt made them better, and they stuck with them and they played with different variations. And it's like, it's really fun training to watch because, you just see them having fun. So,
this like pattern or kind of coming full circle, right? Like going from general to a little more specific back to more general, I think is a big reason why so many people struggle to make that leap from intermediate to advanced, because the changes that took them from beginner to intermediate are not the same ones that are going to take them from intermediate to advanced. So they're like, okay, what took me from beginner to intermediate? How can I add more of that, right? So like for me, for example, like what took me from a beginner lifter to an intermediate lifter, I don't know, doing more training volume. So can I just add more training volume again to go to that next level? Probably not. And in fact, it may end up being the opposite case of as you get more proficient, more advanced, you actually take that volume down a little bit, as you get bigger and stronger. So I think you see that pattern come up again and again and again, both in strength sports and endurance sports, whether we're talking training volume, training complexity, all that kind of stuff. I think intermediate lifters really need to, or intermediate athletes in general, really need to look more closely at their program and not just try to add more of the same thing that got them to that level, but think outside the box a little bit differently and maybe go back to what worked for them earlier on in their training career might be the same thing that is going to work for them later too.
Yeah. I want to kind of go into sort of some common misconceptions when it comes to sort of this hybrid training or this general prep and how it relates. Like one example that I would give is I'm training this sprinter out of the UK, collegiate level sprinter. Or I guess they would call it university there or whatever, but kind of like, I think he's middle distance sprinting. So like 200, a little before 100, that kind of thing. And it was interesting when I got a hold of him because I kind of told him, I was like, look, like I had him do some mobility stuff. I kind of was looking at different things, like how are his feet moving, how are his rib cage, pelvis, like kind of essentials. And they moved pretty well. And it's like he was dealing with all kinds of stuff, like hip stuff and knee stuff, and a very, very bad case of just overthinking everything, right? Like everything was heavily analyzed. And it's the big sort of turn for us was me kind of going into the second phase and going, what do you like to train in the gym? What do you want to do? And he was like, oh, well, I'd like to do some chin-ups and I'd like to do this and I'd like to do this. I'm like, okay, cool. I write his program out and I put in the description, I'm like, go fucking have fun training.
Yeah.
Go have fun training. And he messaged me back that day and he's like, dude, that was like the best training session I've had in years. And the other thing that we did was we added like quote unquote zone 2. We added some steady state cardio into his program, like a couple, 2 to 3 hours a week, something that he can do. Anyone really honestly can do, sprinkled in through the week, which is like a cardinal sin for sprinters, right? Because all sprinters have been told, like, if you do zone 2 cardio, you're going to be slower. And we added it. And the message that I got from him sort of like weeks into it was, man, like I used to have to do all these like sort of pre-activation / rehab specific sort of priming, like whatever you want to call it. I used to have to do all these sort of like drills and whatever for my knees and my hips and my back and my whatever. And he's like, the number one thing that we added and that he feels has the most value to him just feeling good, which allows him to perform well when he needs to perform well, was adding like some basic cardiovascular fitness in for a sprinter. Now, obviously, like somebody messaged me and was like, well, if you are trying to get faster, like obviously, you're not going to spend it's almost crazy that we even have to like contextualize this argument with this, but It's like, apparently you do. Well, if he was like doing that 90% of his training hours, well, then obviously, he's not going to be a very good sprinter. It's like, obviously, like, I don't think anyone is like, no, you know what I mean? Like, yes, I'm aware, but it's funny because it is a misconception. I've had this argument with people before where it's like, everything has to be max speed. And even with like my rugby friend, it's like, he's like, do you do like a quote unquote speed or power day? I'm like, no, absolutely not. Like I work up to a top set and I've got anywhere between 3 to 5 sets plus my warm-up sets where I'm always moving the weight with speed as fast as I possibly can. And if I were to look at like the relative percentages or intensities that people do speed work at, that is my warm-up work. Why am I going to add a whole day of that's essentially just like warm-up work to like move weight faster? Whereas like I'm always trying to move the weight fast. But just a good example of like, obviously a specialized athlete obviously has a lot of specialties, but his strength training, I sort of generalized it. I generalized his strength training, just gave him stuff to feel good, have fun, put on a little muscle, get stronger. Obviously, maybe work on access or like maintaining certain shapes or mobility or things that I want him to keep, like so that way he can rotate well on the track or whatever. And then like a little bit of zone 2. And he's feeling the best he's ever had. And his whole thing was like, you just allowed me to train again and like not overanalyze and because it was a similar conversation. Oh, I think I have this dysfunction and this, and it's like, it's just totally like caved themselves in.
Yeah.
And the internet doesn't help.
I think a common like theme behind all of it is people overemphasize the like negative or maladaptive aspects of a training stimulus. For example, cardio kills your gains, zone 2 makes you slow, hypertrophy training makes you unathletic. like all these ideas that's like, no, like hypertrophy work doesn't make you unathletic. Not training like an athlete makes you unathletic. Zone 2 doesn't make you slow. Not sprinting makes you slow. People overemphasize, there's a shred of truth in all of these things, right? They're not just completely made up hogwash. But people take these little things like cardio kills your gains and they just magnify it 100-fold, while simultaneously ignoring all of the general benefits, like you said, just feeling better, just improved recovery, probably better sleep, better blood flow and circulation, better tendon health, all these sorts of things. People just ignore all that stuff and then hyper focus on these, the maladaptive side of certain stimuli that they really don't deserve.
Yeah, and it's almost like people like to oddly correlate things, and I don't want to like take away from people's perception of like how things affect them and how they experience certain things like acute or chronic pain or whatever. But I have found that people do try to sort of, and I understand why, right? Because people sort of, if they feel like they have an answer or a source for their problems, then they feel like they have more control or like a plan of attack to kind of like go in and address those things. But I have found that people will correlate some like really strange things to like why they're experiencing what they're experiencing. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, look, I don't want to take away your you feeling that thing, but it's like, how do we really know? Like, we don't really know like what is particularly causing that thing, right? Because there are just so many variables, and not only like our existence in our day-to-day life, but just our training as well, and our recovery and all these different things. And it's like, it is hard to correlate and like attribute any one thing to any one experience, right? Because it can be such an accumulation of things. And there's obviously like some nuance there in terms of like, oh, I did this thing and now my knee hurts all of a sudden. But like,
Yeah.
But I guess I'm probably talking more like chronic things, right? It's like you mentioned earlier, like scapular dysfunction. It's like you can't press 10 pounds overhead. Like, yeah, I would agree. Your scapulars are a bit dysfunction. Like they can't press weight overhead. You know what I mean? Like that's, but and of course they go down the rabbit hole of like self, self-prescribing, like just negative things. And it's just like, if you can kind of maybe just spin it a little bit, make it a little bit more positive, like, it can really help alleviate a lot of anxiety I think people get with training.
I think about an example with my wife actually. So when I first met her, like when we had started dating, she was really into yoga, right? So she was a yoga instructor doing yoga every day, super flexible, obviously. And then I kind of turned her to the dark side, right? And gradually over time, she stopped doing some of that kind of stuff and is now trains like for physique and lifts every day. But a number of years ago, she's like, I think all the strength training is making me tight. I'm like, you don't do yoga anymore. Like the strength training didn't make you tight. Stopping doing daily yoga affected your flexibility, obviously. Obviously if you get tremendously well muscled, that can affect range of motion to some degree, but people attribute the wrong things. They think that what they're doing is doing something bad, where like it's usually what you're not doing that's the problem, not the thing that you are doing.
Yeah, I 100%. I run into that. Not really. I would say I maybe used to run into that with the football team, or at least that was like a consideration from the coach when I trained the football team, because he comes in the gym and he sees us doing a lot of like strength work, hypertrophy work. And it's like, well, what about speed work? And what about power work? And what about all this stuff? And it's like, well, I heard this makes you slower or whatever. And it's like, no, here's what makes these guys slower. They go into an off season. They go 12, 18, let's say 12, 16, 18 weeks of heavy strength training, a lot of hypertrophy work. They're eating a shit ton of food, and they haven't ran, they haven't sprinted, they haven't run, they haven't done routes, they haven't thrown a football, they haven't caught a football in 4 or 5 months. That is why they got worse at being a football player, because they didn't keep any elements of football in. It's not that the training is making them this thing. It's that they stopped all the things that make them a good football player and have basically hyper specialized into being like a strength athlete for 5 months. And it's like those adaptations more or less are going to, they're going to regress. They're not going to like disappear, but they will regress because there are still specific adaptations to those things that have to be maintained. If you know what I mean, it's like if you're sprinting every week, even if you're putting on weight, even if you're getting stronger, even if you're a little fatigued, like there's some, build up like residual fatigue occurring, which is going to happen. They're probably not going to get slower as long as they're actually still training speed, if they're actually like training that specific quality still. So I think that's like an incredibly like valuable point, because man, I think that's like one of the best points I think people could probably take away from this is it is usually what did you drop out or what did you remove that had specific adaptations, and now you just randomly correlate it to, oh, well, this thing is bad because, and that's like one of the things that I dealt with flexibility for a lot of years was like two common misconceptions. It's like, one, strength training makes you tight. It's like odd, right? Like strength training makes you tight and non-flexible, or you can get extremely flexible with strength training. And it's like,
right.
Not exactly, there is a little bit of truth again in those statements, but it depends on like what's lacking, right? Because like if you're strength training and whatever, and you're still stretching, you're not going to get tight. And if you're getting more flexible, sure, maybe the strength training is helping a little bit, but you're still stretching. Therefore, it's still the stretching that's making you more flexible.
I think it's interesting how worked up people will get over the whole like strength training and flexibility or range of motion debate, where it's like it's a fairly, like, I don't say totally benign, but it's just not a super potent stimulus for that in either direction. Like it's not going to make you super tight. It's not going to work any miracles for your range of motion. Like it's strength training. Like it doesn't have to be this huge conversation. I think for most people, just a full range of motion strength training program is probably sufficient for like having the mobility to get through their daily life. But obviously, if you have more intense flexibility goals from that, like if you want to be able to do the splits, you're going to have to work on that. You're not just going to do some stuff like deadlifts and but I think this whole idea of not over specializing, not over periodizing, and not letting any distinct fitness quality just totally be thrown off the stove completely is really, really a critical concept with hybrid training or concurrent training in general. Like if you're trying to get really strong and have great endurance, you have to concurrently train those things. You can't do 3 months of strength work and then 3 months of cardio, and you can't do this back and forth oscillating approach and expect to move the needle very far in either direction. So I think learning how to actually do those things concurrently, how to maintain a fitness quality, just the idea of maintenance in general is super important for concurrent athletes. It doesn't mean you have to be moving the needle forward on all things at all times, but you have to know like what's the minimum I have to do to maintain my maximal strength? What's the minimum I have to do to maintain my cardiovascular capacity, so that when you do get to a point where you can push that, that attribute forward again, you're starting from a good place and you're not kind of starting over. Because that's the thing I see time and time again, and why people struggle to make this progress is, one, they didn't know how to do the two things, actually like progress them concurrently at the same time. So they focus on one, abandon the other. And then when they switch, they realize that they now suck at the other thing. And they're just kind of seesawing back and forth, and they can't seem to get that balance. So I think maintenance is a super important concept.
Yeah, it's an incredibly important concept, but it's also like, I think one of the primary errors in team training, especially when like the coaches of the sport are in charge of like sort of conditioning and those kind of things, is that they also are always like, if I think of like my rugby practice, right? It's such a moderate level of everything all the time that there's no way anyone is getting top end or bottom end stimulus to actually like make them a better athlete, which is going to make them a better rugby player, right? So like, obviously, again, guys who are like out of shape and don't do shit their whole off season, they come in and they do practice and they start running again. They're doing drills. They're obviously going to build some cardiovascular, or make some cardiovascular improvements, right? But it's like mostly done in like a level of moderation, where like they're never really getting faster because they're never really training like speed at all, and they probably aren't in the gym training like near like strength. because again, a lot of people, what happens is when they get into sport, all of a sudden the training drops out, right? And it's like, well, our athletes, they're feeling beat up and they're feeling weaker, and it's like, yeah, that's because you literally they stopped training. Like, yeah. Again, it's like a similar, it's the same concept. It's like, yeah, they're not training. I'm not saying they need to come in and train, 1 rep maxes every week or whatever, but there's no reason that athletes, I really think most sports, even at the highest level, they're still very generalized there's a lot of generalized capacity that needs to be covered that I just don't think is covered. It's just not. Yeah. They think that the practice or the sport itself is going to give them all the adaptations they need, which is crazy. Because again, if you actually look at any high level, look at how much work they do outside of the sport itself to just get better, whether it is direct skill work relating to the sport or generalized things. Like if you think of Michael Jordan and how he started working with, why can't I think of his freaking name? Tim Grover. Right. And started really pushing a lot of heavy strength training. And I mean, he also went and played 18 rounds of golf and then would go and play a championship basketball game. And he is Michael Jordan. But the point is there is just so much net positive benefits to the accumulation of just general physical preparation for everyone. I don't care how specialized you are. I think the argument just comes down to obviously, how are you using your resources? But resource management is something that you have to learn for anything, not just sports, but life. You have to learn how to manage money. You have to learn how to, manage food. I mean, there's just so many different things, and it's no different. And I think that's the argument this. It's sort of the straw man that people use against general preparation. It's well, you're not going to make a sprinter better by adding a bunch of general preparation stuff. Well, it's not if they stop sprinting. Right. But as long as they continue to sprint, they're gonna be better. I promise you, they're gonna be better. Right. And I think so
the bias is the general work isn't sexy, right? So I think as far as the general public is concerned, and especially now in the social media age, no one is posting videos of, here I am again riding at 100 watts on the bike.
On the bike for an hour. Yeah, 30 minutes or an hour. I've thought about posting videos, and I'm like, how weird is it to set my tripod up and just film myself on the bike for 30 minutes? What am I going to do with that? You know what I mean?
Right.
Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go through all this effort to post that, and people are just going to go like this. They're going to go, oh, cool. Yep. And they're just going to go right past it. You know what I mean?
And it's not as being disingenuous, right? It's not like we're trying to hide the secret that you need to do this sort of work. It just, obviously that's not where the interest lies. That's not where there's variable options, right? There's different strength protocols. Are you doing sets of 3 or 5, or which exercise are you picking? Where when it comes to some of the fundamental stuff, there's only so many ways to make it sexy or interesting, right? So I think that
usually the editing, that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah. So I think that is just sort of this innate bias that makes people not think it's important. When something is kind of simple, it's taken for granted and forgotten about. So I think, or I wish that there was a way for us to make people realize how important that is. Kind of turn up the sex appeal a little bit somehow without losing the
message, right?
Losing the message, yeah.
Yeah, it's tough because it's a lot of people saying, and it's stretching is similar. It's wow, how'd you get so flexible? It's well, let me just sit in this one position here for 3 minutes trying to touch my toes.
Right.
That's my video. That's my post. You know what I mean? It's of course they want to see some crazy exercise and some crazy protocol, because I think people at the end of the day, they do need a justification for why they're not just doing the basic stuff. It is boring. It is not sexy. It is a cliche statement for a reason, because it is just the work that you have to show up. You have to have some integrity as an athlete and as a human being, and be there's no cameras, there's no fancy editing, there's no nothing. It's just, I showed up and I sat on that bike for an hour and I did the work. And it's man, you can do that from your living room. Buy a Peloton, throw on a movie, and go bike for 2 hours. Because you're going to do it during the week at some point anyway. I guarantee most people will. And so it's there it is right there. There's your 2 hours.
Another thing that I think causes some confusion or leads people to misapply certain training modalities is the idea that, yes, there is some kind of crossover between energy systems and demands, right? Like you take a rugby practice and there is a cardiovascular component to it,
Of course,
right?
yeah.
Like I'm not discarding the cardio component of playing a match or skill practice or that kind of thing. But the idea that just because something is a component of it, that it's sufficient, right?
Right.
So like just because there's a cardiovascular component to X doesn't mean it's sufficient to train your cardiovascular system, optimally. Hate to even use that word at this point. But think of like a Metcon, a kettlebell circuit, football drills, like this kind of stuff. Yes, there is a cardiovascular component, but how many rugby drills would you have to do to get the same amount of cardiovascular stimulus as 90 minutes on a bicycle?
A lot.
Like you would be fucked up. Like you would be so fatigued, you'd be so tired. The quality of that sport practice would be total garbage, right? Like by the time you got to the point where you're approaching what you can get on a pretty easy bike ride. So yes, there's cardiovascular component to it, and yes, it's going to contribute meaningfully to your cardio fitness overall. But if you try to use the wrong tool for the job, there's going to be consequences to that. If you try to use sport practice for cardio, the quality tends to go down. It tends to be super fatiguing. Same thing if you like go into the gym and you're like, I'm just going to fly through this really quick. I'm going to do sets of 30, no rest, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, you will get a little bit more cardio out of it, but the strength stimulus is shit now. So I think that's a big takeaway with the training side is like, just because something has an element of cardio or an element of strength does not mean that's the best way to address that quality. And just using the right tool for the right job is often the best approach. And in the context of hybrid training, that's really that's what it's all about, is it's strength and conditioning where we intentionally choose the best tool for the job. Like we use strength work for strength. We use cardiovascular endurance work for cardio. And for some reason that's controversial, like just using the right tool for the right job and doing strength and conditioning, as opposed to, some other approach. But yeah, it kind of blows my mind how people think that that's such a crazy idea.
Well, this is such a good conversation because like you said, there are benefits, and those benefits do sort of like cross over and merge into aspects of strength and aspects of cardiovascular fitness or aspects of mobility or whatever may be the typical target that people are generally going for, right? Body composition, mobility, strength, whatever. And it's like, I think people, again, they think of like this generalized hybrid training but the thing is like, it's generalized, but there's still specificity within the different like target goals that you're trying to achieve. And it really is more about optimizing those specifically, but doing it at the same time as like targeting a very specific adaptation, which there is obviously specificity, but you're just concurrently doing them at the same time versus like I'm just kind of doing everything half-assed and I'm not really getting any top end or bottom end adaptation anywhere. Everything's just kind of, I'm accumulating tons of fatigue, but not really getting like, again, the most optimized benefits from strength training or from hypertrophy training or from, cardiovascular training or whatever. And I think that's like a discernment that people need to understand and make, because it's not like, you can get somewhat strong and somewhat cardiovascular fit doing kettlebell circuits, but it's like, or you could just take the same amount of time that you're going to do that in the same amount of hours, and you can just optimize the strength aspect of it, optimize the body composition aspect of it, optimize the cardiovascular aspect of it within the same window of time. But you're actually just hitting you're actually going into like top end adaptations and actually making worthwhile adaptations to where those needles are moving a lot further and they just have way more benefits at the top end than just kind of always being around. Like, I think that's like a misconception that people make, right?
Yeah, I think another misconception, kind of in the same category, is people think that more specific is always better, right? Like specificity is king, blah, blah, blah. And so they apply this idea of specificity to work that is meant to be general in the first place. So like they try to make their low intensity aerobic conditioning more sport specific, right? Which is weird to me in the first place. But that tends to backfire because the more specific you get with that, that is going to result in more specific fatigue as well. So the more you're making it similar to your sport or similar to some of your other training, that fatigue is going to cross over more. Why not take advantage of the fact that it is general and it can be different? And you can, say for a sprinter, like maybe not do an easy zone 2 run because that's going to tire their legs out in a similar way that they're going to need to use them for sprinting, right? Where put that person on a bike for their zone 2 work,
Right. Yep.
something less specific, more general for the general work, so that you reduce that fatigue crossover and they can get higher quality out of the specific work they are doing. So I think it's a prime example where specificity is not king. General is general for a reason.
Yeah, I like that. Keep your specific work specific and your general work general, right? What is your take on, since we're kind of here, it would also be interesting to get sort of your physics take on like sport specific movements in the weight room, right? Like what's your kind of approach to that statement? Like, there's obviously a lot of coaches that try to mirror exact movements and joint positions and things like this that are seen in the sport. And then they go into the weight room. They're like, because this is how they play their sport, we have to do these things. And a lot of times we only can do these things because if we do anything other than this, like it's going to take away from over here or whatever. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times there's good ideas there, right? Like you want some level of specificity in terms of training the right muscles, training the right positions or muscle links, et cetera. Like you don't want to just completely ignore that. But I think people often focus too much on making a movement more specific in terms of what it either looks like, or kind of the complexity, coordination, integration piece of it. They add specificity in that way instead of like acknowledging the limits of specificity of, okay, are we training the right muscles, positions, muscle links, et cetera? And probably, velocities even perhaps, but maybe stop there. Let's maybe not try to train a baseball swing with like a cable machine, like a bat tied to a cable or something like that.
Right.
Like you don't have to get that specific or that close in terms of mirroring. The more specific you get, it often comes at the expense of the fundamental qualities you're after. So I like to think of it as how specific can you get before that specificity starts to backfire, and acknowledge that you might be training the right position or muscle length in a way that doesn't look visually similar at all, or vice versa. So I think trying to remove that component of it, of don't just try to make it look like your sport. Think about the actual demands of the sport. The demands of the sport, the demands on the tissues, et cetera, are far more important than what something looks like visually or what the coordination of that exercise is, some of those variables. So I think there is room for sport specificity, so to speak, in the weight room. I think we just often go about it the wrong way, and try to overdo it at the expense of those fundamental qualities.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw someone make a post recently. I can't remember who it was, but it was a really good post because it was like what you think you're doing in terms of like mirroring sport specific joint angles and stuff, but then like not understanding the force curves and the force vectors and like what tissues are experiencing what amount of tension. Because it's like just because the ankle, knee, and hip are in the same position as like starting position, it doesn't necessarily mean that like the force going into the certain tissues or joints is the same on these different exercises or angles, because it's not it's like from a physics standpoint, it's like where is the force actually being applied? What muscles are actually, responsible for creating contractions and things at these angles, because just because it looks the same doesn't mean that the same thing is actually happening. Right.
Yeah.
So,
well, and sometimes we totally, misapplied, reference frames and forces in that way. Like sprinting, for example, I've seen people make the argument that sprinting, because sprinting is horizontal, that a hip thrust would be more specific to sprinting than a squat.
That's a very common. Yeah.
Which to me is like one of the dumbest things you can possibly say. But for some reason it's caught on and people hear that and they're like, oh yeah, it makes sense, checks out. I'm like, well, if you just think about it for like 5 seconds, it really doesn't. But that's a great example of people making a movement say look more similar, for example, or they think they're moving the hips in the right direction. But when you think about, what's actually going on with those force vectors, it's not as specific as you think it is.
Yeah, and that's a big one, is like reference frames. People are very bad at reference frames. That's like one of the things that I've learned with describing relative motion. It's like people's brains just fry. First of all, it's almost like they forgot the principle of motion being relative, period. Right. So like motion is always relative. So we always have to provide a reference frame when we're talking about movement. But it's like, then if you actually try to provide reference frame and get them to see the reference frames, it's like, it's just like, it's very hard for people to grasp. Like reference frames are very hard for people to grasp. They're quite hard for whatever reason. I like a good reference frame, because then I go, okay, I see what we're looking at here. But like a lot of people, if you try to provide it, it's just like, they just like, again, well, it looks like the same thing, so that's good enough for me. And it's like, but it's not, but that's fine,
Yeah. I've seen some cool like camera editing now, where they'll like stabilize a video around a certain joint or whatever. So like, this is what the movement looks like from this reference frame. And there's some cool, like, the movements just look bizarre, like if you look at what someone's running gait looks like, but just stabilize the video at the person's knee joint and like see how everything else is moving relative to that body segment. It's like, you often pick up on things that you didn't even realize. You're like, I didn't even think about the fact that was moving this way relative to that joint. But yeah, very interesting. And I can understand why it's hard for people to grasp, but they should certainly make an effort to.
Yeah, especially if you're a coach, or if you're like, or if like you're trying to solve like a movement issue for somebody, because if you don't have the reference frame, you're just shooting in the dark. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what, as an endurance athlete, like now hybrid athlete, because that's really what you are. I mean, and your strength numbers are like, I didn't say that in the beginning to take away from your achievements as an endurance athlete, because you're very achieved as an endurance athlete. But like, when people look at your page too, obviously, like, we're visual creatures, and we see lots of plates on the bar, and we're like, holy crap, this guy is really, really strong. What advice do you have for somebody who maybe they've just predominantly been sort of a strength athlete? First of all, everyone hire a coach. But if you had to give somebody some advice, like, okay, they come from predominantly a strength background and they want to get into endurance training. And I'm not going to lie, I would say this is one of my weak points too. Like, if I wanted to specialize in endurance training, or at least like become more specialized, like if I actually wanted to train for an endurance event outside of just like doing cardiovascular training for just the general benefits, which is basically all I do it for, right? Mm-hmm. Where would someone start?
Yeah, and a big starting point is just like your frame of mind, right? Like, how are you thinking about it mentally? And I think people that come from an extensive strength background, they've gotten to the point where they're an advanced athlete. Being a beginner at something again requires a mindset shift. So just being willing to put yourself back into that position, reflect back on what it was like to be a novice strength athlete. What advice would you have for your former self in the context of strength work? And I think there's going to be a lot of parallels you can draw with, how you might want to approach the endurance work as well. A key point being patience, right? Like, how long did it take you to get to where you are on the strength side? People want to rush the process. They're great at strength. They want to be great at endurance too. But they don't want, again, that 10, 15 year process or whatever it's going to be. Even though they know better, if you sit down and have a conversation with someone and ask them, how long do you think it takes to get to the level you want to be? I think conceptually they know, emotionally they might not though. So just encouraging that patience, getting people to realize that it is a long process, especially for the strength athlete. I think a lot of times people that have naturally gravitated to the kind of strength, power, speed, side of the spectrum, they did so because that came more naturally to them. That's going to be what they're better at. So not only have they, been lacking an endurance background, but that's probably not their natural forte either. So they're fighting definitely an uphill battle. So if anything, it's going to be an even slower process, even more gradual process than than the process they went through to become a good strength athlete. So just setting expectations, being realistic about what that progress is going to look like, and even more so, I'd say for the strength athletes for whom that came super naturally, like the guys who were like deadlifting 500 plus in their first year of training, like those
my high school football players.
Yeah, those genetic anomalies, they're used to things coming very easily to them, and it's probably going to be the opposite, if they do approach the cardiovascular side. So again, realistic expectations is big, and just the patience, because the aerobic side of things is slow. It's not something where you can add 20, 30 pounds to the bar every month like you could when you were strength training for the first time, right? You're not going to see that super quick progress in the aerobic side. So yeah, patience is the biggest one. Do a reasonable amount of zone 2 work. Just overall aerobic hours is going to be the number one thing that correlates with your cardiovascular fitness long term.
And to touch on that, the graphics that I've seen is like there's nothing but net positive benefits for like lower to moderate intensity steady state cardio, like upwards of like 15 hours, right? Like it's like you can actually put in a lot of time and a lot of hours on a weekly basis and see almost nothing but net positive benefits. Where obviously like you can't do that with strength training. You can't go into a gym and train 15 hours a week and expect to see only like net positive benefits, right? Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. And to kind of add on to it, an interesting graphic I saw was it was correlating basically total aerobic training volume with mitochondrial mass. So basically like underlying cellular marker of your aerobic fitness, like more mitochondria, more aerobic fitness, right? So it's correlating kind of lifetime training volume with that. And it was interesting to note that when people are just training a little bit, there is a strong correlation, but it's not as strong as when people do more. Basically, the more aerobic training volume you do, the more predictable the response to it. Whereas you're going to see like non-responders, for example, like people are like, I just don't respond to cardio as well as others, or it can explain why some people seem to not have to do very much cardio and they're still, freakishly fit or whatever. There is much more variability when it comes to how you respond to low volumes of aerobic training. But as you do more and more, again, that response gets more predictable. And it's pretty much a guarantee that if you do enough work, you will get very fit. If you do a small amount of work, maybe it works out for you, maybe it doesn't. You might need more. But if you get to the point where you can handle and recover from more and you keep adding, eventually you're going to get to that point where it's a guarantee. It's not an if, it's just a when it comes to, is that aerobic training going to pay off for you?
It's really interesting because I think people have a misconception that aerobic training adaptations actually probably come faster than I would say strength adaptations, right? Like I feel like people would say, oh yeah, like I can definitely get in better, like more cardiovascular, but it's like, but then if you actually compare it to like, what are we comparing it to, right? Like compared to who? Compared to your coworker or compared to like someone who actually runs like 10Ks or 5Ks or even a mile or a marathon or whatever, right? Like had a buddy who ran his first marathon, he did like 6 hours. And it's like, which is like, look, he finished a marathon, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, what is it going to take for someone to go from a 6-hour marathon time to 4-hour, a 3-hour, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it just time? Is that just volume of cardiovascular training?
Well, so the reality is that when you look at most people who are running like a 4-hour, 5-hour, 6-hour marathon, their limiting factor is not really their underlying aerobic fitness. If you look at someone who's able to maximize their aerobic fitness in terms of their running economy, their anaerobic threshold, their structural endurance, all that kind of stuff, you can run a sub 3-hour marathon on a pretty modest VO2 max, for example. You don't have to be some like insanely fit aerobic monster to run a pretty impressive marathon time. For a lot of people, it's those other factors. And I think that leads people to believe that they can improve their aerobic fitness very quickly. For example, they might improve their marathon time by 45 minutes in a 16-week training program, right? They might run a 4:30, train for 6 months, and then run a 3:45, and they're like, my aerobic fitness like changed dramatically. It probably didn't. Like your actual VO2 max, for example, might have budged a point or two, or maybe not changed at all. But all these other factors have gotten better. Your muscular endurance, your ability to maintain form under fatigue, your fueling approach, like all these other things can contribute to aerobic performance. Aerobic performance is not just aerobic fitness. There's a lot of other factors to it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But when it comes to things like your overall metabolic health, your recovery, things like that, the actual underlying aerobic fitness is what matters. And that is a slow process, even if your external measures of aerobic performance can be changed more quickly due to some other factors. Once you maximize those other factors, though, right? Once you figure out how to fuel properly for your marathon, once you get your legs to withstand the fatigue, once you kind of remove all those other limiting factors, and it does boil back down to aerobic fitness again, now you're at a point where progress is going to look really, really slow. So for a lot of people that are at that point where they're still removing other limiting factors, they're not even to the point where the aerobic system is the limiter yet.
Those are probably the elites, right? Like, yeah. I think it's good too, is that's probably a really good point, especially with running, is like, I think you're right. A lot of people's limitations are actually just like the structural like the actual structure adaptations to the running itself, right? Like I have no doubt if I really wanted to, I could go out and run a marathon tomorrow, but my body is probably going to feel like shit for weeks afterwards, because it's just like, it's just because the adaptations to that amount of endurance on the physical structure itself just are not there. The joints and maintaining certain technique, obviously under like muscular endurance, and maintaining technique under a long duration of time and things like that. Like, because I think most people make that mistake. And that's kind of why I asked, because it's like, oh, where do people start? Oh, hey, I want to run a faster mile and I haven't ran in months. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go out tomorrow, and they just run a mile. And they just try to run it almost as fast as they can, more or less. And I think that's where most people just kind of start with like endurance training. I know a mile is laughable to actual endurance athletes, but like for the average person who's like, I want to run like a sub-6, like a 5-minute mile or somewhere in there. It's like they're just going to start going and running a mile every day, and they're just going to keep trying to run that mile as fast as possible. And I'm sure there will be some acute improvements, right? But then there are factors that they don't take into consideration, like structural adaptations to the plyometric forces of running and gait and running economy and different things like that, where it's just like that they don't even think about all that. Like, they probably do actually have the cardiovascular fitness in some, especially if you have some history of like playing sports or being athletic or whatever. Yeah, you probably actually have a pretty decent level of like cardiovascular fitness, but it's these specific adaptations that are going to probably limit you.
It's kind of like, the idea of newbie gains, right? Like when you first start squatting for the first time, like you didn't actually gain a shit ton of muscle mass in 2 weeks, right?
No.
You just figured out how to manage your center of mass a little bit better and things like that, right? It's that the hypertrophy comes a little bit later on.
Coordination, basically, like coordinative improvements. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you get down to the fundamentals of aerobic adaptation, similar to hypertrophy, it is really quite slow, especially if you've been training more than 6 to 12 months. You're not putting on 10 pounds of muscle in a month. Like an intermediate to advanced trainee, you might be lucky for a handful of pounds in a year, right? And the same is true of aerobic adaptation. So again, when someone's first starting out, you should expect to see some pretty rapid gains. Whether it is underlying aerobic capacity or some of these other factors, you might have a several month period where you're making really quick progress, and you're going to hit what feels like a plateau. It's not a plateau. You're past the point where some of those easier gains and other limiting factors are holding
low hanging fruit.
So my biggest piece of advice, I'd say, for someone new to cardio is don't get frustrated when you hit that point. You might feel like you're plateaued for a long time when you think about how slow some of these adaptations are, especially with like the mitochondrial density, some of those sorts of, very fundamental aerobic adaptations. You're not going to see big changes in a handful of weeks or a month. You might be looking at, retesting some things every quarter or so and seeing 1-2% gains. And that's great. If you can get that consistently, quarter over quarter, year over year, you can, take things really far in the long term. Just be realistic about what to expect.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message to sort of maybe start closing this out, is that, at the end of the day, like, a lot of our limitations are going to be predominantly biological. And we have not really at all, even though a lot of people like to pretend that they have, or that they're in that field right now, we haven't really found a way to speed up biological adaptations that are made, right? That the human body is like capable of. Like, the bottom line is, it just takes time. It takes an accumulation of stress and fatigue to actually create an adaptation. And then it takes time for our biology to then develop and actually adapt to that continuing accumulation of stimulus. And when it comes to hypertrophy, is a good one. It's like Angus makes a joke, is like, there's no such thing as a 12-week hypertrophy program. There's just not, right? Yeah. Because you're not actually putting on a significant amount of cross-sectional muscle tissue in 12 weeks. Like, there's going to be fluid, changes made in like cellular fluid. Like, you're holding more water, you're holding more fluid, you're holding more liquid. Like that's going to be one of the primary changes that people are like, yeah, I put on 15, 20 pounds in 12 weeks. And it's like, and 70%, more than that. Yeah. 90% of that is water. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not to say it's bad. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's just that, like, we don't build tissue that quickly. You know what I mean? We just don't. And so, and it's constantly breaking down and constantly rebuilding. It's cyclical, and it's not like a 12-week, like it's always happening. And I think, like, if people just quit making time their enemy and just making time their friend, and just understanding, like, I understand it's obviously have short-term goals, because it keeps the meter moving, but, like, have the realistic expectations that if we want to even moderately excel at some of our pursuits that we go out and sort of, like, go after, you just have to give it time. You have to give it time, and whatever it takes to get you to persist through time. It's okay if you think it's tons of structure. It's okay if you think it's, if you just want to go into the gym some days and just play. You know what I mean? Just do something, just move around, do whatever. Like, obviously, you want to try to be maximizing your time as much as possible, because time is a limitation for most people in terms of, like, how much time they have in a week, especially people who are not. Even though I'm a professional, I'm still limited by how much time I actually have to, like, training in the gym, right? But I think people need to understand, and even with strength, it used to be heavily thought like strength is purely neurological, but it's like, we have a pretty good amount of research that shows us now that, like, actually strength is, like, pretty heavily dependent on cross-sectional muscle tissue. Like that's actually one of the primary drivers of, like, improving strength. And again, if you go and you look at how long does it actually take to build quality muscle tissue, it takes time. And a lot of those acute benefits or big benefits that people see, it's things like coordination that have improved, center of mass management has improved. Like, it's really those things that have improved more than anything. But the biological adaptations, they just take time, guys. They take time.
It's like, even in elite powerlifting, like, the best predictor of someone's total is their level of muscularity. Like, not to discount all the other factors, but, like, how much muscle tissue someone has is still number one. And same thing on the aerobic side. Yes, there's outliers. Yes, there's other factors, but the number one thing that's going to determine your aerobic ability is training volume accumulated over years, decades, etc. And there's no shortcut around it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a great way to end it. I mean, it's just like, all the nuance aside, guys, at the end of the day, training really just comes back to the basic principles. It doesn't matter how specialized or how general you want to make it. It's like, if you want to excel at any one thing, be consistent, make time your friend, sleep well, eat well, do all the little things right, and just prepare to be in the game, for the long run. Like, if you really want to have a solid go at it, because at the end of the day, if most of my clients come in and show me a picture of someone they want to look like, or someone, show someone achievements and be like, I want to go here, I want to be here. It's like, my answer to almost every single one of them is, understand it's going to take time. It's just going to take time. And until you accept that, I think, like, once you do accept it, again, training just kind of resorts back to being fun again. And you can just kind of enjoy it for what it is, because then you're like, it's not so goal driven. It is more of just like, it just becomes the process. It just becomes the habit. And it's like, cliche is fall in love with the process. It's like, yeah, you kind of like, look, I don't love training, right? I don't necessarily love to spend my time training, but I do love what I get from it. And when I understand it is for me, I always am changing around, like the last 12 weeks, basically, since I broke my leg. It's like, I've been primarily going to a bodybuilding gym and doing bodybuilding movements. It's still making me better at anything else that I want to do or will ever want to do at any point within fitness. It will make me better at everything that I want to do. Again, as long as I maintain those qualities, or even if I just revisit them. It's okay sometimes for that stuff to fall out, especially if time becomes a factor, if injury becomes a factor, or whatever it is. But just keep moving the needle, guys. Like, that's, at the end of the day, that's really, like, I think the main takeaway is you really can excel at a lot of different things at once. I think humans are very good at that. We're kind of the jack of all trades. It's sort of how we've evolved. We're not particularly masterful at any one thing, but what makes us very good and what has allowed us to survive on this planet for so long is that we are just very good at doing a lot of things pretty damn well. Well enough to survive. You know what I mean? So let that kind of sink and sit in there and just, just show up, do the work. Some days it's going to be fun. Some days it's not. Some days it's going to be sexy. Some days it's not. You're going to have up days. You're going to have down days. Just keep the needle moving, guys. So, Alec, if people want to find out more about you, if they want to kind of see what you're about, especially, please, guys, go to this guy's Instagram. And on first glance, you guys, I promise, will be impressed. But where can people find you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, just my full name, at Alec Blenis. I have a website, alecblenis.com as well. But find me on Instagram. I do a weekly Q&A. I have a lot of fun with that. Always get some great questions. I offer one-on-one coaching, programming, etc. And I also have a team program. If anyone's looking just to see what it's all about, to kind of do the whole thing. My team program called Sex and Zombies is designed to offer a little bit of everything as far as hybrid or concurrent training goes. So it's great for the person who's like, I don't really have a specific goal. I just want to be bigger, stronger, faster, have good aerobic capacity, be prepared for a wide range of movements and for life. If that interests you, I would highly recommend checking out my program and following my page.
Yeah, guys, go check them out. A wealth, just like a vast, just tons of knowledge. I mean, like it's hard to find people in this industry that are a good mix of just like incredibly intelligent and also incredibly practical. Like usually people kind of are, again, here we are again, but like they're either incredibly practical and they don't really understand like anything about what they're doing. They just do it, which is fine. And then there's the opposite too, where it's like people are almost too smart for their own good, but there's almost just no practical application of their knowledge, not only in their lives, but in like anyone's life at all. It's just a bunch of philosophy. And if that's your thing, that's fine too. But I find that Alec is probably you're a very good hybrid. You're right in between the two. Incredibly intelligent, incredibly well-spoken, makes pretty, what can be, hard, like deeper concepts for people to understand. You make them incredibly simple to understand, as well as just like, hey, you're also a very accomplished athlete, both as an endurance athlete and as a strength athlete. So go check them out, guys. Until next time.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Caution.